Okay, let's jump in, shall we? First things first, let's talk homework. So, I hope you kept your homework, because like I said, we're just going to build off of it. So, on top of fixing any problems you might have, I want you to go back to the verb tenses. So you got present, past, and future, but you still have a couple more variations, right? So you need to add, plus symbol. It's either going to be simple, perfect, simple, probably should do same as last ones. It's either going to be simple, perfect, continuous, or perfect continuous. All right. So, if you already did this, if you already did the full thing for the tenses, then don't worry about it. You're already ahead for this week's homework. If you didn't, that's fine. That's why we're focusing on it now. Make sure you know the difference between these, right? I promise you it will be on the final exam. And we're going to add voice. So the voice is either going to be, oh shoot, boop, boop, boop. There you go. Voice is either going to be active, passive, or middle. And if you don't know what this means, that's fine. That's what today's lecture is about. We're going to be talking about voice and reported speech. I don't have reported speech as part of the homework because there's no real speech here outside of, I got one. We only have one reported speech here. So we're not going to do that as part of the homework, but make sure you do that part of the book because you will need that information for the final exam. Okay, so this is on page 1224, right? 1224. Again, you can just click on it from the table of contents and it should take you here. We're going to do voice and speech, and if we got some extra time, we'll do some of the other ones towards the end. So what is voice? Voice, which is also known, if you are a linguist, as diathesis, voice is definitely easier to say, is a grammatical feature that describes the relationship between the verb and the subject, also called the agent, in a sentence. More specifically, voice describes how the verb is expressed or written in relation to the agent, the subject. So, what does that mean? Well, think about a normal sentence in English or even in Korean, right? I ate pizza, right? What's the subject? Well, I am the subject, right? I'm the agent. I'm the one eating the pizza, all right? What's the object? The pizza. And what's the verb? Ate, right? I ate pizza. Pretty straightforward. But what if the subject of the sentence isn't me? What if the subject of the sentence is actually the pizza? Someone was asking about it. What's this? Oh, that's the pizza that Jamin ate earlier. Okay, well, now that's very different, right? That's what they're talking about by voice. They're talking about how the subject and the verb are framed in the sentence. So there's actually three different ways you can do this. There's active voice, your normal voice, if you will, regular voice, as it were. Passive voice, which is the unusual or the irregular, if you want to call it that. But also a third type called a middle voice. I'll show you the example, and this one will make more sense. Let's start with the active. Like I said, this is how most English works. She wrote a novel. The subject is she. And what's the verb? Wrote. It is an active voice. The subject is actively doing the verb. The house was purchased by an elderly couple. Okay, well, here the house is the subject, but it also is the object. It's the thing that was bought. And it was bought by a different noun here, right? It was purchased by an elderly couple. So this is passive voice, right? The subject, the beginning of the sentence isn't really what the sentence is about, right? There's a different agent, a different person who's actually doing the verb on behalf of the subject. The house was purchased by an elderly couple. It's passive. The subject is not doing the verb. It is being verbed. But what if the subject and the other agent that's actually doing the work is the same thing? Well, that would be your middle voice. The cat licked itself. Aha! The cat is the subject, and the cat is the object, and it itself is doing the licking. The cat licked itself, right? So those are your three main voices: active, passive, and middle. Let's look at active a little deeper, shall we? A verb is in the active voice when the agent of the verb, the person or thing that performs the action specified by the verb, is also the subject of the sentence. They are actively doing something, active voice. The active voice is the most common type of voice in both spoken and written English, and is generally considered to be the default voice, right? Your regular voice. Not all active voice verbs are required to take an object. Any object present, however, must come after the verb. That's how English works after all, which comes after the agent. So for instance, the boy sang a song. Subject, verb, object. Okay. I am watching a movie. Subject, verb, object. Okay. Vivian sings well. Well, here we have no object, but it's still a sentence because we have a substitute for the object. We have in this case, an adverb, right? Saying how they sing. They sing well. Okay. Now, how is that different from passive voice? Well, a sentence uses the passive voice when the subject is acted upon by the verb. So the verb is acting on the subject. The subject themselves are not doing the work. They are passively being worked on. They're not actively doing anything. Passive voice sentences are structurally opposite to active voice sentences, with the object, which is also the subject of the sentence, coming before the verb, and the verb coming before the agent of action. A passive voice verb is used in the past participle form preceded by the auxiliary verb be, and the preposition by is inserted before the agent to form a prepositional phrase. Oof, that sounds complicated, but look back to the example. All the way back up here, right? The house was purchased. Okay. The house is the subject, but it's also the object, and it was purchased, but it didn't buy itself, right? Someone had to pay money for it. Who paid the money? Well, the elderly couple. So, boop, you throw in a by here right before the actual agent, the one that is doing all the work, purchased by an elderly couple. That is the pizza that was eaten by Professor Bassette, right? Same idea. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the other examples here. Angie will perform a famous piano piece tomorrow night. So this is regular, right? Subject, verb, object. Okay, not too bad. But what if the music itself is the focus of the sentence and makes itself the subject? Well, you'd write it like this. A famous piano piece, which is both subject and object here, will be performed, right? Oh, but we need an agent. Who's doing the performing? By Angie tomorrow night. You have to throw in the by there. Who is doing it? The by tells you who is doing it. Thousands of people, subject, have already read, verb, his new book, object. Okay, pretty straightforward. Active voice. His new book, which is the object and now the subject, has already been read. Okay, there's the verb. Now we need to know who's the agent. Who did the reading? By thousands of people. Unlike active voice, passive voice sentences do not require agents. If an agent is unknown or is irrelevant, you may eliminate the prepositional phrase containing the agent. So what they're talking about here is whether it can be a complete sentence without an agent. So remember, the agent is the person doing the thing. So let's look at the example of active voice again. The boy sang a song. Draken, can you just say, sang a song? Is that an English sentence? Well, no, there's no subject. If there's no subject, it is not a sentence. But what about a famous piano piece will be performed? Is that a sentence? Well, yes, because if you remember, this is acting as the subject and the object. So because of that, it is a complete sentence. Is it a good sentence? Not really. Without the context of the agent, the sentence would be hard to understand or harder to understand. It's grammatically correct. It is an English sentence, but it's not necessarily a good English sentence, right? So let's look at their example here. The light bulb was patented. So subject and object was patented, verb, by Thomas Edison in 1880. And he's the agent. He's the one that was doing the patenting. But you could actually take him out. The light bulb was patented in 1880. And it still makes sense. It's still a complete English sentence. The wedding venue has been decided on. Okay, the wedding venue, subject and object, has been decided on, right, verb, by the bride and groom, agent. But you can actually take them out. The wedding venue has been decided on. Okay, again, it's a matter of context. If you're talking about Thomas Edison already, then you could leave him out. Oh yeah, the light bulb was patented in 1880. Do you know by whom? Oh, it was by Thomas Edison. Right? At least that's the idea. Again, context will tell you whether or not you need it. Grammatically, right, by the rules of English grammar, you don't need the agent in a passive voice sentence, but, it's always good to have, just in case. Now let's talk about the odd one out, the middle voice. The term middle voice describes a type of voice that is a combination of sorts between the active and passive voices, where the subject and the object and the agent are all the same thing. This middle voice is not clearly defined in the English language. That is, it does not have a verb form specific to it, right? Look here at these verb forms, right? Was patented, right? Has been decided, right? Sang, watching, sings, right? Middle voice does not have that. It does, however, contain several odd or irregular verb usages that are said to correspond more closely with the middle voice of other languages. So just like with future tense, English technically doesn't have a future tense grammar. Instead, we just have words that represent that. Middle voice is the same. Some languages have a very specific, distinctive middle voice, and others don't. I'm trying to think for Korean, like what would the example to be? Uh, see, in Korean, you just leave out the object of the sentence. Like you wouldn't say the subject and object separately, and there's no way to dignify them as the same, right? 고양이가 고양이를 씻었어요, right? It doesn't really, you wouldn't really say that. You just say, 고양이, 고양이가 씻었어. 고양이는 씻었어, right? I'm probably exposing my poor level of Korean right there. I don't think there's a concept of middle voice in Korean. I might be wrong. If there is a concept of middle voice, please send me an email explaining it to me for bonus points or a bonus point. All right. So, in most middle voice sentences, the agent performs the verb's action on itself. So, the agent, the subject, the object are all the same. To compensate for the lack of a middle voice verb form, these verbs are typically followed by a reflexive pronoun. If you remember, reflexive pronouns are words that end in self. So herself, himself, itself, myself, right? Themselves. For example, my girlfriend, subject and object, always checks, verb, herself. Well, there's the object, which is also the subject, which is the same, which is a reflexive pronoun. In the mirror before we go out. The dog bit itself on the tail. It's another reflexive pronoun, itself. The middle voice can also be used to describe some intransitive verbs. These verbs syntactically, oh my goodness, appear active, so agent plus verb, but function more similarly to verbs in the passive voice. In other words, the agent is being acted on, right? Like the passive voice, despite its position in front of the verb. 얘는 the lasagna cooked in the oven for several hours, right? The verb cook is being acted upon the agent lasagna. The bicycle broke without warning. The verb break is acting upon the agent bicycle. There you go. All right. Yep, almost 20 minutes. That's about the time you want for a good break. Go ahead and take yourself a break. Make sure you understand the differences between these, right? Make sure you do all of these questions. Some of them might show up on the exam, right? Some of them will show up on the exam. You just don't know which ones. Okay, let's deep dive into active voice a little bit more. The active voice is a type of grammatical voice in which the subject of a sentence is also the agent of the verb. So, a normal, regular sentence. That is, it performs the action expressed by the verb. I eat pizza. You watch a movie, right? In active voice sentences, the agent always comes before the verb. Again, English is subject, verb, object. But even in Korean, which is a subject, object, verb structure, the subject is going to come first, right? That's just the normal way of speaking. My friend bought a new car. So subject, verb, object. Pretty straightforward. She enjoys watching movies. Subject, verb, object. Pretty straightforward. Barney is talking to his sister. Subject, verb, object. Now note, a direct object is not always required for active voice verbs. When an object is included, however, it must come directly after the verb. So, think of the example that we had up there where she sings well, right? There's no object, there's no direct object in she sings well, but, right, we still have that adverb there, well, substituting for an object. And when you have an object in an active voice sentence, it has to be right after the verb. I am drinking what? Some tea. The boy hid, what did he hide? His report card. Dr. Johnson will speak where? At the convention. But here, that one did not have a direct object, right? So Dr. Johnson will speak, speak his speech, or give his speech, if you wanted a direct object. Here there is no direct object, but it's not needed. It's understood from the context. Dr. Johnson will speak at the convention. All right. When to use the active voice? Well, this is the default. This is the normal, regular way to speak, so most of the time. Typically, the active voice is preferable to the passive voice, as it requires fewer words and expresses a clearer relationship between the verb and its agent. It has a very straightforward structure. If your sentences are easier to understand, you will communicate better. The active voice is generally thought of as the default, right? 보통 그냥, regular, voice in spoken and written English. The following section contains circumstances in which you should always try to use the active voice over the passive one. When there is no direct object, so like in the case of she sings well. Because passive voice sentences require direct objects, because the direct object is also the subject of the sentence. Sentences without direct objects must be active. For instance, that man, subject, has painted a verb for more than 40 years. Right? There's no direct object. He painted paintings, right? That's omitted. But you can tell from the structure, from the context, what he was painting. We departed immediately after the grand finale. So subject, verb, no object, but you probably departed from the theater or whatever, right? But again, from the context, not needed. The kids chanted for several minutes. Subject, verb. What did they chant? They probably chanted a song or a nursery rhyme or something. But you can omit it, you can get rid of it, and it still makes sense. But only if you use active voice. You can't do this with passive voice. These sentences cannot be put in the passive voice because there is no direct object to become the subject. As an example, let's try to make the first sentence passive. For more than 40 years, has been painted by the man. What? What has been painted? Right? We have no idea. Since what was painted was never said, it can't be the subject of the sentence, right? So, if you have a sentence where you're omitting or not saying, or there is no direct object, right? She sings well, then you have to use the active voice. When the agent is important. Remember, for passive voices, you can omit the agent. You can just get rid of that, and it still makes sense, right? The pizza that was eaten. right? That's still a sentence, right? This is the pizza that was eaten. We don't know who did the eating, but I mean, that's still a sentence. But what if the agent is important? Someone asked you, who ate that pizza? And you said, that is the pizza that was eaten. You didn't answer their question, right? You have to tell them the agent in that case. That's what they're asking for. So in those situations, right, the active voice is the only one you can use, or the one you should use. The active voice is commonly used to emphasize the importance of an agent in a sentence. By using the active voice, we can highlight an agent's responsibility for or involvement with a particular action. So when the person or the subject, the agent, is more important than the action, you must use or really should use active voice. These examples below demonstrate the difference between an important agent, where you should use active voice, and an unimportant agent, where you can use passive voice, it's fine. The employees drink lots of coffee before work every day. So, what's more important here? The coffee or the employees? What's the sentence actually about, right? Lots of coffee is drunk by the employees before work every day. Here, the coffee is more important than the employees. So it really depends on you, the speaker. What are you trying to say is the more important, right? So in this sentence, you probably could get away with making it passive. Yeah, lots of coffee is drunk in this office every day. Who's drinking, it's not important. You probably can guess that it's the people working there that are drinking the coffee. But let's look at this example. Sir Isaac Newton discovered gravity more than 300 years ago. Sir Isaac Newton's probably pretty important to that sentence. You could say gravity was discovered. Yes. And I'd say the average person knows that it was Sir Isaac Newton that discovered it, right? But, Sir Isaac Newton is kind of important to that sentence. So in this example, I would consider him an important agent in that sense. When the agent is known or relevant, you should always use the active voice if an agent is identifiable or contains information that is relevant, that is important, to the rest of the sentence. So, for example, Sean stole a menu from the restaurant. Okay, if you just said a menu was stolen from the restaurant, you're kind of downplaying the fact that you know who stole it. Right? If you know who stole it, that's kind of important information to the sentence, right? Makes sense? A veterinarian found an abandoned puppy by the road, right? Here, maybe that's important, right? Maybe that's important so you understand that the puppy is now safe and taken care of, but otherwise it's not quite as important. Now, if it was a veterinarian that the speaker knew, right? Oh yeah, my sister, the veterinarian, she found an abandoned puppy by the road. There, the agent would, be much more important, and you really would want to say it, to emphasize it there. Dr. Lee opened the hospital in 1989, right? So here, since it's a person, right, it's a person who, seems to be well known by the speaker or by the listener, it makes sense that, they're included. On the other hand, when an agent is unknown or irrelevant, we usually switch to the passive voice and eliminate the agent altogether. So let's say you don't know who stole the menu. A menu was stolen from the restaurant would make a lot more sense. You could say a thief stole a menu from a restaurant, but yeah, of course. That's redundant. You don't need to say that. That's like saying, you painted the wall with paint, right? Of course you painted it with paint, right? Same idea. Since you don't know more information except it was a thief, you can just admit it. An abandoned puppy was found by the road. If you don't know who found it, it doesn't make sense to say an abandoned puppy was found by a person by the road, right? That would just be redundant. The hospital was opened in 1989. If you didn't know who opened it, there's no reason to say the hospital was opened by a doctor in 1989. Of course it was opened by a doctor. Who else would open it, right? Also, the active voice is useful when expressing an authoritative tone. The active voice may also be used to stress the authority of an agent, right? They had the power to do something. So when you use active voice, it makes it sound like they had the power to do it, right? They had not just agency, right? It wasn't just that they, were the ones that did it, but they, did it by their own volition, their own strength, their own desire, that sort of thing. So, for instance, for copywriting or advertising or marketing, it's often used to convince consumers of the beneficial effects of the product or service. So, 얘는 brushing your teeth at least twice a day is recommended by dentists. Now, that's okay, but it makes it sound like brushing your teeth is more important than the dentist. Here, dentists recommend brushing your teeth at least twice a day. This makes this sound more important because an authority figure is telling you to do it, right? Well, imagine, you should eat fruits and vegetables. Okay. An important doctor said you should eat fruit and vegetables. Well, that makes it sound like you should do it more, right? You have a stronger desire to do it now, right? Wash your hands. You should wash your hands versus mom said you should wash your hands, right? That's giving authority, right? Giving power to the agent there, right? All of your broccoli must be eaten by you before dessert is served. That's kind of a mouthful. Instead, you must eat all your broccoli before dessert is served. Makes a lot more grammatical sense. Okay, when the agent is an ongoing topic, so something that you keep talking about, right? The topic of your conversation, for instance. Agents that can perform multiple actions may be treated as topics. Making an agent an ongoing topic places emphasis on that agent instead of the actions it performs. So, Caroline jumped back and gasped. She was afraid of spiders and despised the feeling of their silky webs on her skin. But she knew it was time to face her fears. Sighing and brushing herself off, Caroline slowly continued down the path towards the hill. Right here, she is what's important in that paragraph, right? Because she is important and she's doing multiple things, keeping it active voice the entire time makes a lot of sense. Again, think of any time you have a conversation about a topic, like how much you love chicken. You're going to be using the word chicken a lot, right? And you're going to be using the active voice of, you eating the chicken and your friend enjoying the chicken and the chicken tasting good, and right? So active voice makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yep, about 15 minutes. It's just about perfect. Go ahead and take yourself a nice break. Pause the video, take your break, and do your quiz. Make sure you understand what the agent is, right? What's the agent? And how is that separate from the subject sometimes? Okay. Okay, now that you're back, let's jump on to passive voice. the passive voice is a type of grammatical voice in which the subject is acted upon by the verb, right? It is the thing being verbed. It is the object, if you will, right? Subject and object are the same thing, but not the agent, right? The concert was attended. So the concert is the subject, but it's also the object. It's the thing that was attended. But it's not the agent. The concert didn't go to itself, right? Who went to the concert? By many young people. Ah, they are the agent. The necklace is being made. So the necklace is the subject. It's what the sentence is about. It's also the object. It's the thing that's being made. But it's not the agent. It can't make itself. Is being made by a child. Oh. Passive voice verbs are always preceded by the auxiliary verb be. So is, was, right? They are the highly irregular verb be. Is, was, were, be, been, am, right? While the receiver of the action comes before the verb, the person or thing performing the action, the agent, comes after the verb. And is preceded by the preposition by a child, by many young people. For example, the lights, subject and object, were turned off, verb, by the janitor, agent. Final exams, subject and object, will be taken, verb, by the students, agent. Letters to Santa, subject, object, are sent, verb, by children, agent. So, how do you change the active voice into the passive voice? You may only convert a sentence from the active voice into the passive voice if there is a direct object, right? The thing that is being used. So remember the example from above. If there is no direct object, she sings well, for instance, you can't make that passive voice. For example, a high school track and field star won the race. Well, there we got a subject, we got a verb, and we have a direct object, a thing that they directly did. They won it. Okay, so that you can easily change to passive voice. You just make this the subject and the object. The race was won. And then add the word by, and then put the original subject, the agent in this case, here at the end. The race was won by a high school track and field star. Local businesses, subject, are handing out verb, pamphlets, object, near the mall. So, how do you make this passive? Put this in front to make it the subject and object. Pamphlets are being handed out, because you need the verb to be in there, and you already have are. So are being handed out, verb, and now you add the word by, and then the agent, local businesses near the mall. If an active voice sentences, do not. They made a grammatical error here. If an active voice sentence does not contain a direct object, it cannot be converted into the passive voice, as the sentence will lack coherency without a subject. So coherency means the ability to understand it. So for instance, the kids are playing outside. That makes sense. What are they playing? It doesn't really matter, right? You can imagine what they're playing. What's important is that the kids, they're doing this, they're doing it outside. The kids are playing outside. But you can't make that passive because there's no direct object. You didn't say what they were playing. Is being played by the kids outside? Is that a sentence? No. It makes no sense. It lacks coherency. It's not able to be understood because you're not saying what the subject is. Remember, every sentence must have a subject, no exceptions. So, how do you convert the passive voice back into an active voice? Well, just by, doing the opposite we did before. You may only convert a sentence from the passive voice into the active voice if there is an identifiable agent of the verb. So as long as you said who is doing the thing with a by, then you can translate it back pretty easily. This blanket, subject and object, was knitted, verb, by my grandmother, agent. To make this active, you just move grandmother back to the front to make it the subject. My mother, get rid of the was, knitted, and then put this after to make it the object. This blanket. Subject, verb, object. Boom. The deer, subject, object, was being chased, verb, by a bear. Agent. A bear, subject, was chasing, verb, the deer, object. If a passive voice sentence does not contain an agent, it cannot be converted into the active voice. So, the Great Pyramid of Giza, subject, object, was constructed, verb, more than 4,000 years ago. Okay, we don't have an agent here. Constructed, the Great Pyramid of Giza, more than 4,000 years ago. That makes no sense. You started a sentence with a verb. There's no subject there. You must have a subject, always. So, when should you use passive voice? Well, as we said in the beginning, active voice is the default. So if you have to choose, or if you aren't really choosing, if you're not thinking about it, if you're just making a sentence in English, active voice is the default. It's the one you are going to use, right? 십중팔구, right? 9 times out of 10. But when should you use passive voice? When the receiver of the action is important. Remember, we like to highlight, to emphasize important information in English by putting it at the beginning of a sentence. So, whenever you are putting the dependent clause at the beginning of a sentence, right, and then adding the comma there in the middle, the reason you do that is for emphasis, right, to say this part is the important part. So, when should you use passive voice? It's when the object is more important than the agent, right? The object of the verb is more important than who is doing it. So, the school dance will be organized by the science teachers this year. This structure is saying that the dance is more important than the science teachers. So if that's the emphasis you want, then passive voice makes sense here. The science teachers will organize the school dance this year. This makes it seem like the teachers are more important than the dance. And in this case, active voice makes a lot more sense. So really, it's up to you, the speaker. The speaker is deciding what they think is the important information and is choosing the correct grammar structure to fit that. She is always being praised by her parents. Here, she sounds more important than her parents. Her parents are always praising her. Here, her parents sounds more important. Also, you should use passive voice when the agent is unknown. If you have no idea who the agent is, if it's irrelevant, right, you're painting with a paintbrush. Yeah, of course you're painting with a paintbrush, right? I'm typing my homework on a computer. Yeah, of course you are. You're typing it. Of course it's on a computer. Or it's implied, right? It's understood from context, right? Occasionally, the agent of an action may be unknown or irrelevant to the rest of the sentence, or it can be heavily implied through the action or receiver of the action. In these cases, the agent may be eliminated altogether. You don't even have to say who's doing it. So for instance, my missing wallet was returned to the lost and found. So my missing wallet is the subject and object, was returned, verb, to the lost and found. You notice there's no by. It doesn't say who returned it. And there can be two choices. Either they don't say who returned it because it's unknown, right? You didn't meet the person who returned it. Or it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter who returned it because what's important is you found it. You got it back. A popular play is being performed at the local theater. So here, it's much more irrelevant. It's possible it's unknown, like you don't know the name of the people who are putting on the play. But what's probably more important is that it's irrelevant who's performing the play. You kind of already know. It's going to be actors and actresses. You don't have to say, a popular play is being performed by actors and actresses at the local theater. That's just redundant information. You don't have to say it. Bathing suits are usually sold in the summer months. Here, it's heavily implied. You don't have to say who's selling the bathing suits because it's stores, right? Stores are selling the bathing suits. It's not like there's someone specific or someone special that's doing the selling that you have to emphasize, right? If the person doing the selling is important or is special, then you would have specified them. Bathing suits are usually sold by department stores in the summer months. Yeah, that is relevant information. But if they're just being sold by stores, you don't really have to say it. You can guess that from the context. When softening an authoritative tone. An authoritative tone is when you're trying to make it sound like you have authority, like you have knowledge or experience, or you know something very well. So you notice how I talk about grammar? I talk about English grammar as if it's something I'm an authority on, right? Like I'm the boss of English grammar. It's something I know very well. The reality is I'm more of an authority than you just because I'm a native speaker and because I'm a professor and because I went to school to study this and because I have this book. Really, that's all where my authority comes from. I didn't invent English. I didn't invent grammar, and I make mistakes all the time, right? So, by me speaking in an active voice, it makes my tone sound very authoritative. It makes it sound like I know what I'm talking about, like I'm the boss. You should, mo, 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 mo. It's important to mo, mo, mo. But by talking in a passive voice, it makes it sound less authoritative. Let me show you this example. Inexperienced mountaineers should not attempt Mount Everest. This makes it sound very, it makes it sound like I know what I'm talking about, right? Like I'm talking from experience. I'm an experienced mountaineer and you're not. But let's do it in a passive voice. Mount Everest should not be attempted by inexperienced mountaineers. This makes it sound much more like a suggestion, right? And I'm emphasizing the mountain being dangerous more than I'm emphasizing you being inexperienced. Does that make sense? It kind of softens the blow a little bit. It makes it sound more cautious in my advice, in my authority. If the agent is clearly implied, it may be eliminated. You need to finish this project by tomorrow. Well, of course. But if I'm talking to you about your project, I don't even need to say you, right? This project needs to be finished by tomorrow. I can just drop the word you from the sentence. It's very obvious from the context that you are the person doing the project. It's your project. You're the one that needs to do it, and you're the one that has to do it. I don't have to say the word you, right? This project needs to be finished by tomorrow. When expressing a professional, neutral, or objective tone. So when you want to sound very clinical. So think about like a documentary, right? When you're listening to a documentary and they're explaining things, they'll tend to take a more passive tone. Various forms of writing, including scientific reports and instruction manuals, use the passive voice to express a professional, neutral, or objective tone. They're not taking side A or side B, right? The experiment was conducted over the course of 2 weeks, right? Here, they're not saying who did the experiment. And again, it might not be important, right? Especially if it's already been mentioned, right? Who's doing all the researching. Once part A has been inserted into part B, tighten the screws with a screwdriver. They don't have to say the agent. In this case, the agent is you. You're doing the screwing, right? This is an instruction manual. They don't have to say you. They can just keep a very neutral tone. Anyone can screw it in. It can be you. It can be your mom. Who cares? Adverse reactions to the medication should be assessed and treated by a medical professional. So here, they're emphasizing the reaction and the medication over the medical professionals. They're keeping a very passive voice. Okay. Yep. It sounds like break time. Go ahead and take yourself a nice break. Go ahead and do the section here, and then we'll move on to the last section dealing with voice. That's middle voice. And we should have enough time to also cover speech today. That's good. All right. You done with your quiz? Good. Let's carry on. The middle voice. The so-called middle voice is an approximate type of grammatical voice in which the subject both performs and receives the action expressed by the verb. In other words, to make this simpler, subject, object, agent, all the same thing. So in middle voice, the subject, object, agent are all the same. All right, the cat licked itself. The other part of middle voice that makes it special compared to the others is the use of reflexive pronouns. Those are the pronouns that end in self or selves. So itself, himself, herself, right? Myself. He injured himself playing rugby. So subject, object, and agent are all the same thing, him. The cat is scratching itself. The subject, object, and agent, all the same thing, the cat. And the himself, reflexive pronoun, and itself, reflexive pronoun. Middle voice verbs follow the same syntactic structure as the active voice, so agent plus verb, but function semantically as passive voice verbs. As a result, the middle voice is described as a combination of active and passive voices, right? It's the middle ground. Because there is no verb form exclusive to the middle voice, it is often categorized as the active voice since it uses the same verb structure in a sentence. The following examples highlight the similarities between the two. Some snakes have tried to eat inedible things. So that's a normal sentence. Subject, verb, object. Got it. Some snakes have tried to eat themselves. Subject, verb, object. It just so happens that the object is the same as the subject, and it is a reflexive pronoun. So you can see why they're saying it's the same structure as active voice. Just treat it as a form of active voice. The man accidentally hit his face. Subject, adverb, verb, object. The man accidentally hit himself in the face. Right? The subject, adverb, verb, object. But in this case, the object is also the agent, which is also the subject, which is also the object. That's middle voice. How to identify the middle voice. We can distinguish the middle voice from the active voice by determining whether there is a reflexive pronoun. Those are the pronouns that end in self. After the verb in the direct object position, or an intransitive verb acting upon the agent. When the direct object is a reflexive pronoun, because the agent is also the receiver of the action, they are the agent, but they're also the subject and object. In the middle voice, we can clarify this connection by inserting a reflexive pronoun after the verb. The child warmed herself by blowing into her hands. So she's the subject and object, subject and the object and the agent. Small dogs tend to hurt themselves when playing with bigger dogs. So small dogs are the subject and object and the agent. Many middle voice verbs are transitive verbs and therefore require a direct object in the form of a reflexive pronouns. Without a reflexive pronoun, the receiver of the action becomes unclear and the sentence loses coherence. As a quick reminder, what transitive verbs means, trans as in meaning across, right, is when the subject is doing this across to an object. The child warmed herself. That's a transitive verb. This is transitive. Versus intransitive, like she sings well, would be intransitive. It's not going across to something. Reusing the agent. Instead of adding a reflexive pronoun, will affect the coherence of the sentence or even changing its meaning altogether. The child warmed the child by blowing into her hands. So this is bad. You could do this in Korean. 애기가 애기를 도와줬어요. But no, even in that context, it sounds the same as in English. When you do that, 애기가 애기를 도와줬어요, that makes it sound like the child is helping a different child, right? Yeah. So that's why we have reflexive pronouns. That way there isn't that confusion, right? The child warmed the child makes it sound like a different child versus the child warmed herself. Small dogs tend to hurt small dogs when playing with bigger dogs. That makes it sound like small dogs are hurting different small dogs when they're playing with big ones. Likewise, using a personal pronoun instead of a reflexive pronoun will change or confuse the meaning of the verb's action. The child warmed her by blowing into her hands. Again, this makes it sound like the child is helping a different female child. Small dogs tend to hurt them when playing with bigger dogs. Makes it sound like they're hurting someone else, some third party we don't know. However, there do not exist certain verbs for which the reflexive pronouns are implied. There do exist, and therefore will be eliminated. My father is shaving himself in the bathroom. That makes sense, but it's also not how we normally would say it as a native English speaker. My father is shaving in the bathroom actually is more common. Well, think about it. If your father is shaving, who is he shaving? If you just say, my father is shaving, 우리 아빠 명도하고 있다. Okay, who is he shaving? Well, he's shaving himself, right? You don't even have to specify it. Even in Korean, you wouldn't have to specify it. It's very obvious from the context. So because of that, you don't need the reflexive pronoun himself. Big ol', just get rid of it. She always stretches herself before doing yoga. That makes grammatical sense, that works, but that's not what you would hear most native English speakers say, right? She always stretches before doing yoga. You don't have to say herself, because who else is she going to stretch, right? Of course she's stretching herself. That's what you normally mean when you say stretches. When the verb is intransitive and acting upon the agent. So like in the case of she sings well, right? Certain intransitive verbs can be used to modify an agent that is also the receiver of an action. In the middle voice, this type of verb does not take a reflexive pronoun. My sister's lunch is cooking on the stove. So cook is an intransitive verb describing what is being cooked. My sister's lunch is cooking on the stove. You don't need to say my sister's lunch is cooking itself on the stove, right? You don't need to say that. This car doesn't drive smoothly anymore. You don't have to say this car doesn't drive itself smoothly anymore, especially since the implication is that, you're driving. Her engagement ring broke in half, right? You don't have to say her engagement ring broke itself in half, right? You can just get rid of it. The boy laughed when he heard the joke. You don't have to say the boy laughed himself. That doesn't even sound natural to say, right? Someone is crying themselves in the hallway. Again, that just sounds odd. Doesn't sound like, doesn't sound very native. Okay. You can determine whether an intransitive verb is in the active voice or the middle voice by changing the verb into the passive voice. Doing so will convert the intransitive verb into a transitive verb and the agent into the receiver of the action. My sister's lunch is cooking on the stove versus my sister's lunch is being cooked on the stove, which is obviously passive voice. And doesn't have an agent. It's not saying who's cooking it. Because cook can be converted into a transitive verb in the passive voice without altering the meaning of the original sentence, we know that the original sentence must be in the middle voice. Here's another example. The boy laughed when he heard the joke. The boy was laughed when he heard the joke? No, that doesn't make any sense. When converted into the passive voice, the original sentence loses coherence. Therefore, we know it must be in the active voice. Okay. So, even though middle voice, Shibjung Paragu is in the active voice format, for those occasions where we're not quite sure, try converting it into a passive voice sentence. And that will make it pretty obvious whether or not it has that structure. Okay. Go ahead and take yourself another break before we move on to talking about speech. Okay? Make sure to do all the quizzes. It will behoove you. It's to your benefit to do all the quizzes. Okay? All right, you're back? Good. Let's talk about speech. Grammatically, speech refers to how we report something another person has said. Depending on how we do this, we sometimes have to inflect or change the form of the verbs we use. So think about this. You watch this video and you're talking about it with another student. And you talk about what I said in this video. That's speech. That's what they're talking about. Boo, 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 boo. And there's two types of speech, at least two main ones. Direct speech and indirect speech. Although a lot of times indirect speech will be called reported speech because, well, you are reporting it. You're stating what someone else stated. All right, let's take a look at each of these, starting with reporting verbs. Both direct and indirect speech use what are known as reporting verbs. To report means to say what someone else has said. The most common of which are say and tell, right? When we use tell, we need to use another person's name or a personal pronoun as an indirect object. Tell me why. Tell Susan mo, right? Other reporting verbs include ask me a question. Instruct, instruct her how to finish the task. Explain this grammar point to me. Mention, I mentioned it was Sunday. Suggest, I suggest you finish your homework on time. And claim, the newspaper claims to have discovered a cure for cancer. Direct speech. Direct speech refers to the direct quotation of something that someone else has said. That means you are using their words. It is sometimes known as quoted speech. Because the quotation happened in the past, we put the reporting verb in the past simple tense. He said mo. But we don't change the verbs used within the quotation. We also punctuate sentences in a certain way when we use direct speech in writing. So you may have seen these before. Quotation marks. Okay. So quotation marks are used for direct speech. You're quoting someone else's work, right? As Jesus said, love thy neighbor. So there we have the past tense of say, said, and you would put it in quotation marks, right? This is for American English, by the way. That's why all of my quotation marks look like this. British English, they often use single quotation marks. In American English, we use single quotations inside of quotations. Oof, that sounds confusing. So let me show you an example from the book, actually, from your homework. All right, here. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So, this is a quote because it's quoting the Bible. So, quotation mark, quotation mark. But within this sentence, there is another quote. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That's a quote. The author was quoting someone, right? So, to show the quote inside of the quote, we use singular quotes. And since the singular quote ends at the same time as the double quote, we actually put all three here for the very end. Okay, so American English, we use two. British English, they use one. But American English, you can use the one when you're quoting inside of a quote. If you're quoting an entire sentence, we set it apart with one or two commas. Yinan, John said, comma, I'll never live in this city again. Mary told him, comma, I want to have another baby, comma, which took him by surprise. The other day, my daughter asked, comma, Mommy, why do we have to go to school, but you don't? However, if we are quoting a fragment of speech that is used as an integral part of the overall sentence, then no commas are used. We still use reporting verbs in the past tense, though. So, for instance, John says he feels really bad about what happened. So, Did John say, really bad? No, John probably said something really long. John might have said something like, to be honest, that car accident is really my fault. I feel really bad about it, and I want to get better, and I really want to be more careful in the future. That's so long to report. Really, what's important is that he feels bad, right? So that's all you quote. John said he feels really bad about what happened, right? The rest of the quote, you don't really need it. Direct speech before a reporting verb. You can do that. In fact, you'll see that a lot. We can also put direct speech before the reporting verb. Again, we use a comma to separate the quoted text from the unquoted text. I can't wait to see Daddy, comma, my son said. However, if a question mark or explanation point is used in direct speech, then we do not use a comma, right? We use the question mark instead. Where are we going? Asked Sally. Now, this is something that trips up a lot of people. You notice, this ask is not capitalized. It's because it's not a new sentence. This is all one sentence. The question mark is not a real question mark. It's just marking that you say it in a questioning voice. Where are we going? Asked Sally. It's actually one sentence. This is going to be great, Tom exclaimed. The only reason Tom's capitalized is because it's a proper noun. Okay, 1 second. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, back to the book. End of punctuation, American versus British English. In American English, a period or comma used at the end of direct speech always happens within the quotation marks. So, real quick fun story here. My first semester as a university professor, I marked a student wrong on one of their essays because they put the punctuation on the outside. And I didn't know that was common in British English because I read a lot of British English writing, but it's always been rewritten to be American English, like in books and then magazines and things like that. So I wasn't used to seeing that, and I felt really embarrassed whenever I had learned my mistake. Right? They didn't make a mistake. I did for not asking if they were trying to write it in British English. What they're talking about is this. Boom. You would not do this in American English. In American English, you would put it on the inside, right here. So let me show you here. Okay. So this is all American English. See, the period is here on the inside of the quotation mark. In British English, it would go on the outside of the quotation mark. Note that if a quoted sentence ends in a question mark or explanation point that belongs to the quotation, it will appear within the quotation marks for both. If the question mark explanation point belongs to the overall sentence, that is, it isn't actually part of the quotation, it will appear outside the quotation marks for British English, but inside for American English. Yenin. Samantha asked, how long will it take to get there? For this, since the question mark is part of the question, of the quotation, the question mark is inside of the quotation marks for British and American English. But here, I don't want to just see how things go. This explanation mark is not part of the quotation, so it goes on the outside for British English. But for American English, it would go inside. Always inside for American English. Using multiple sets of quotation marks. So this is kind of what I was showing you before. If a sentence already uses quotation marks, then we have to differentiate between the quoted speech and the rest of the sentence. So, Got quotation marks because the whole thing is quoted. So quotation mark, quotation mark. They told us. Then here starts a new quote. So we get the little single one. We don't have the budget for more staff. And since both the original quote and the new quote end at the same time, we have 3. Now, this is different from British English. In fact, in British English, it's bande, the opposite. They start with the single. The Prime Minister is reported to have said that he is, and then double, in disagreement with the President's remarks, quotation mark, which prompted a quick response from the White House, singular. Reported speech. So this is indirect speech. When we tell other people what someone else told us without directly quoting the person, it is called reported speech. It's also sometimes known as indirect speech or indirect quotation. So you're not quoting their exact words. You're quoting what they were implying. You're quoting their feeling, right? Their message, their meaning, without quoting their exact words. We still use reporting verbs in reported speech, but we no longer use quotation marks because we're reporting a version of what was said and not a direct quote of what was said. We also do not use commas to set the reported speech apart, although we often, but not always, introduce it with the word that. So, for example, Janet said she would go to the station herself. So is that her exact quote? She would go to the station herself? Is that what she said? No, she probably said something like, I'll just go to the station. Really? Don't you want to go with me? No, I'll go by myself. Oh, okay. What did Janet say? Oh, Janet said she would go to the station herself. Right? So since it's not a direct quote, you're just quoting or just reporting the feeling of what she said, the meaning of what she said, the implication of what she said. You don't use the quotation marks. She told us that she wanted to be alone. Did she say that, or he wanted to be alone? Did he say that he wanted to be alone? No, he probably said something like, leave me alone. I don't want to be with someone right now. So, he told us that he wanted to be alone. It's not a direct quote. You're just reporting generally what was said. You're paraphrasing, if you will. Shifting verb tense in reported speech. The conventional grammar rule when using reported speech is to shift the verb tense 1 degree into the past, right? So if it's present tense, it goes past tense. If it's past tense, then it goes past perfect tense, right? When this is because we usually put the reporting verb in the past tense. I asked mo, and she said mo. They told us mo. He suggested mo. Because reported speech, the actual speech itself happened in the past, right? You're just talking about it now in the present. But you're talking about a past tense thing. I live in Germany, right? He said he lived in Germany. Past tense, right? Said, lived. Makes sense. Because he's not saying it right now. He said it in the past. I was a carpenter before I moved here. What did he say? Oh, she said that she had been a carpenter before she moved here. So past tense becomes past. And past is past perfect, right? So past becomes past perfect. He is writing a letter to our friend. Aha! So we have present continuous, so you need to make it past continuous. She told us he was writing a letter to our friend. She was sleeping when you called. Aha! Past continuous. It needs to be past perfect continuous. He told me you had been sleeping when I called. I have been to Paris 4 times. So this is present perfect tense, so we need to make it past perfect tense. She said she had been to Paris 4 times. The film had ended when I switched on the TV. So this is already past perfect tense. Yeah. So it's just keeping past perfect tense. He said the film had ended when he switched on the TV. When she finally arrived, I had been waiting for over 2 hours. So this is past perfect continuous. So you can't make it any more past from that, so you just keep it as is. He said he had been waiting for over 2 hours when she finally arrived. I will call you tomorrow. Aha. So we got the future tense, but we need to make this future tense word into past tense. So what's the past tense version of will? It's actually would. I will call you tomorrow. He said he had told me that he would call me tomorrow. Okay. It should be noted, though, that it is quite common to use the verb tense, to keep the verb tense the same in modern English. This is especially true in cases in which the reporting verb remains in the present tense, or when the thing being reported is still currently true. So, a lot of it depends on context again. So, I live in Germany. Oh, did you? Oh, I was just talking to Soo-young. Yeah, he lives in Germany. So you don't have to say Soo-young said that he lived in Germany. In colloquial, in spoken English, you could actually keep the verb tense the same, and it still makes sense. Like the gaps are being filled in the listener's mind that obviously the person said this in the past, right? You don't have to specify that it was said in the past. You can kind of guess it. Okay, good. Other categories of speech. While direct and reported speech are the two main forms of grammatical speech, there are two other subcategories that we use: free indirect speech and silent speech. So what's free indirect speech? Also known as free indirect discourse, discourse just means to talk together, is used to indicate the thoughts or mental processes of a character. As such, it is most commonly found in prose writing. So you're writing about what a character is thinking. It is most often used in the form of a question. Rhetorically, so it's a fake question that answers itself, asking something about the character's situation. We do not use reporting verbs to introduce or indicate free indirect speech, and like reported speech, it is used without quotation marks. So we see this a lot in books, right? He had no money, no job, no friends. How had his life arrived to such a desperate point? Is this a real question? Is the book asking you a question and you have to answer them? No, it's a fake question. It's rhetorical. But it's telling you what a character is thinking, right? So technically it's quoting something. It's quoting what this character is thinking, but the character never said it, right? It's their internal thoughts, right? It is their free indirect discourse. It's indirect because you're not talking to someone and you're not quoting someone directly, right? And technically it's speech because it's something being said, but it's something being said internally in their mind. Janet had just learned that she needed to give a speech to the entire school in less than an hour. What was she going to do? This is a real question? No, it's a question she is thinking to herself. Or rather, the book is thinking on her behalf, right? She's not saying anything really. And that's what makes it different from silent speech. So with this, the book, the narrator, like the writer of the book, is summarizing what this character's thinking. Silent speech is the character saying it in their own head. So right now, I want you to say the phrase, I am thinking in your own head. You probably said it using your own voice inside your mind, right? And if you were going to write that down, right, like in a book, that would be silent speech. Silent speech refers to a direct quotation that is said internally, inside someone's mind. They said it to themselves in their mind. By someone, to himself or herself. We still use reporting verbs, and we often apply the exact same punctuation rules to silent speech that we use for direct speech. Amen? I'm never coming back to this town again, he murmured to himself. So he said this in his head, but since it's a direct quote, these are the words he said to himself in his head, we put in quotation marks. She thought, what a beautiful country. Again, these are her exact words, so we put them in quotation marks. It is equally common, however, to use silent speech without quotation marks. To make the question stand out from the rest of the text, some writers still use italics to indicate silent speech. So these are italics, right? When you kind of slant the letters over, italicized. This can sometimes be used when writing a book if you don't want to use quotation marks, because again, technically they're not saying it, they're thinking it. So this is kind of a way for writers to imply that this is something that the character is thinking rather than saying out loud, right? Because when you look at this, I'm never coming back to this town again, he murmured to himself. It's not until you read the second part that you know that he didn't say it out loud for other people to hear. But by doing it like this with italics, it's easier for the reader to know immediately that it's not something the character said out loud. It'll be quiet around here when the kids go to college, Dan thought. So here they made it bold, but here they made it italicized. She asked herself, how am I going to get out of this one? So technically, all three you can do when you're writing. It's kind of up to you as a writer. That being said, this isn't a novel class, right? I'm not teaching you how to write that type of English. So keep it a little more professional, right? Try to keep with the quotation marks when you're quoting someone, even if it's just quoting their thoughts. Okay. I think that's going to be it. It's about that time, right? Yeah, an hour 30. Okay, so go ahead and do this final quiz. Okay, and then that's it. That's it for the book. Yeah, kind of crazy, huh? At this point, you got one more homework left to do. Get that turned into me. And then for week 15, it's just going to be the final quiz. Again, it is open notes. So take good notes. Make sure you're prepared. While the average for the class went down from exam 1 to exam 2, it's just because of a couple students that happened. For most students, a lot of you actually did better on the second exam, with a couple people getting perfect scores. And I think just getting used to the exams, understanding how they feel, kind of being more prepared, made it a little bit easier for you. So I hope to see that again on the final. Just take good notes, come in prepared, and I know you'll do fine. Okay, that's it. Good luck. God bless. Take care. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.